So let me set the scene for you. 3 Canadian members of parliament from 3 different political parties giving a joint news conference to media presenting a united front against the big bad tech giants like Google and Meta, who have threatened to yank all Canadian news from their sites. And what does the government minister do?
Today, we are announcing the Government of Canada will be suspending advertising on Facebook and Instagram.
He threatens Meta, suspends all Government of Canada advertising on their platforms, which adds up to like $10 million worth of ads, which is like nothing to Meta. It's peanuts. No, you know what? It's less than peanuts. It's like peanut dust, because Meta made more than $100 billion US last year. So $10 million Canadian dollars is nothing. But here's the thing. For those MPs who started this fight in the first place by insisting Meta and Google pay for linking or sharing Canadian news content on their sites, this is just the beginning.
They've received billions of dollars from Canada. Now it's time for them to give back.
So today, what is this new law of the land requiring big tech to pay to put Canadian news on their platforms? Why are they so dead set against it? And is this actually the beginning of a worldwide reckoning for the biggest internet companies on the planet?
This is not just a dispute over advertising, it's also a dispute over democracy. We're not backing down on this. This goes to the core of a free and informed society.
So what is so scary that major tech giants like Google and Meta are willing to go so far as to cut Canadian news right out of their services? Well, the Online News Act, passed last week, basically requires them to negotiate deals with Canadian media companies, compensating them anytime their news content is used or shared. So let's say I'm just some dude, and I Google Bill C-18 Online News Act because, I heard about it on TV and I want to learn more about it. So you see these news links here. We got one from CBC News, one from the Globe and Mail, one from Global News, the Canadian ones here. The goal of the bill would be to force Google to compensate those companies for sharing their content. How much compensation? Well, the act doesn't say. It only says that the 2 sides have to negotiate, and this is directly from the legislation, they provide for fair compensation to the news businesses for the news content that is made available. The reaction?
Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, now says it will block news content on its platforms if the bill is passed.
Yeah, they hate the idea. And why wouldn't they, right? They'd have to start paying for what they currently do for free. They'd have to negotiate individual deals with Canadian news organizations, and if they can't, there's a whole formal bargaining process through mediation that can last for months. So they've threatened, if this bill takes effect as planned in about 6 months from now, they will cut out all Canadian news from their search engines, from their news pages, Facebook, Instagram, Google Discover, all gone. Meta is already even running a test, cutting about 5% of Canadian users off Canadian news. News is very much a struggling industry. It's been on the decline for many years now.
Fresh round of massive layoffs hit the Canadian media industry today. Bell Canada announces cutting 1,300 positions and closing or selling 9 radio stations.
In the last 15 years, hundreds of newsrooms across Canada have shut down. Newspaper subscriptions have plummeted, TV viewership is in the tank.
Among them, CTV is shutting down its news bureaus in London and Los Angeles.
And increasingly, present company included, people get their news from Google, from social media, right? Like basically anywhere I can get quick, small bites on my phone. It's a vicious cycle because, we're all on our phones, advertisers pay to be there, and so if you're the Kamsack Times in Saskatchewan and you've lost advertising revenue, maybe you can't afford to keep all your reporters on staff. The quality of news suffers accordingly. Readership declines. And where do those readers end up?
80% of all the money from online advertising and going to do companies. So they're making money. Good for them. Good for them. We're happy for them. But they have to contribute in a fair way.
The Online News Act is a way to keep newsrooms in business by returning some of that advertising money. But, you might ask, aren't they still getting ad money if people are clicking on their links? Well, just because you click a CBC article doesn't mean you stay very long on the CBC site. You know, it might surprise you to learn retention in our business is often measured in seconds, not always minutes. And after you scroll through an article, you'll probably just go right back to Facebook or Google or wherever you came from. And the bulk of the ad dollars stay with big tech. Big news corporations have been in favor of this leveling of the playing field for a long time. The Toronto Star is on board. They've even already signed content sharing deals with Meta and Google. And CBC's corporate position, just for full transparency here, is also pro C-18, pro Online News Act. But other media outlets have spoken on Parliament Hill about what would happen if Google and Meta made good on their threat.
These platforms are the best on-ramp to news that we have found, and we have tested many. Today, Google and Facebook combined generate almost 50% of our traffic on an ongoing basis.
And it should go without saying, losing 50% of your traffic is bad. This is the very definition of being stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? Being so reliant on Meta and Google has crippled ad revenue for newsrooms. But if you don't have Meta and Google sending people your way, do you survive at all? That's been Google's argument from the start, that they're actually acting almost like a free newsstand. You know, people walk by, they see some Canadian news, they read it. That's ultimately good for Canadian news, because are you really going to fault the newsstand for becoming the dominant way people find and read your articles? For Google, they think of the Online News Act as a link tax. You know, every time someone clicks a link, bam, Google gets charged. And their criticism of the bill is that it would seem to allow for uncapped financial liability that, quote, no business could accept.
News aggregators like Google News have to pay publishers for showing extracts of their articles.
Meta saying that it will potentially pull news content from Facebook. This will in fact happen, they're saying, if Congress passes a new bill.
The Journalism Preservation Act, a bill under consideration in Sacramento that would require Facebook, Google, and Microsoft to pay usage fees to local news outlets.
So make no mistake, Canada is not alone in this fight. Americans are very much fighting it too. In California, there are efforts to impose a so-called journalism usage fee, you know, very much following the Canadian example. But Meta is dead set against that too. They've threatened to pull news out of California. France recently took on Google, arguing that it breached copyright laws by publishing and reusing news content that wasn't theirs, and Google had to pay up. Then there's Australia.
Australia has passed a new law that requires digital platforms to pay local media outlets to link to their content in news feeds or in search results.
They're a few years ahead of us, but in a very similar situation. So according to The Guardian, for every $100 of online advertising spending, get this, $53 went to Google, $28 went to Facebook, and that leaves, if you do the math, $19 for everyone else. Digital dominated. So Australian lawmakers passed a similar law. Google and Meta both threatened to pull Australian news, but they worked through it. Amendments to the law were made, and now Google and Meta have struck dozens of deals with Australian news media. And the same thing might happen here in Canada, sort of.
Google wants to keep talking, discussing, finding a path forward. And it's also clear that Google's concern can be met by what we plan to do in the regulations. Meta, on the other side, is not talking to us, unless they call this morning. I don't think so. So they took a different approach.
So what was originally a war between government and primarily two tech giants may end up being a war between government and Meta. But what we do know is that Canada is still a relatively small fish. The real test will be what impact the outcome here has on the rest of the world, following or not following suit.
The world is watching. The platforms know that we're at the table, we're ready to talk to them, we're open to discuss, but we're not open to doing nothing. Status quo is not an option.